and get started because I know everyone's schedule is probably as jam-packed as mine is, and delaying something by 5 minutes can have spillover effects and cause us to miss our flights a week from now. Thank you for coming along to Accelerating Digital Collaboration and Engagement, Experimenting with Open Communities. We have 3 speakers joining us today. Very excited about, I should say, I'm Heather Staines. I'm the head of partnerships with the MIT Knowledge Futures Group. We build open source software for publishers and libraries and researchers, which my colleague Katherine is going to talk a little bit about. Katherine's going to be the first speaker. Immediately to my left, Katherine Graham. She is the content lead for ProcessPump at the Knowledge Futures Group. She joined the team in 2017 as community manager, and she works directly with a lot of the collaboration partners. Before joining KFG, she earned a PhD in editorial studies from Boston University, which I'll say I come from publishing, and I did not know that that was a thing, and I'm completely blown away. She spent a lot of time in archives and microfilm rooms wondering why so many valuable collections weren't openly available in digital form, so we're pleased to have her. Second, to Katherine's left is also Katherine. Katherine Dunn, who is Scholarly Communications Librarian at MIT Libraries. She manages the open access policy workflows and supports the MIT students and researchers with open access, author rights, copyright, and funder policy questions, which I assume there are more every single day. And last but not least is Liz Milowitz. She is the Digital Scholarship Services Librarian at Duke University. She heads up the Digital Scholarship and Publishing Services Department, and she's co-director of ScholarWorks, a Center for Scholarly Publishing at Duke University Libraries. She also co-authored a 2018 Mellon-funded report called A Framework for Library Support of Expansive Digital Publishing, and I'm really excited to hear what the 3 speakers have today. I think we'll hold our questions till the end, but they are going to aim for like 5 to 7 minutes, so we should have a good 10-15 minutes at the end for questions, and we hope a lively discussion. And excuse the pillar of success in the middle of the room.
How are we doing? Are we sitting?
No, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, we can do whatever.
Thanks, Katherine.
Yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Let's see. My slides out there, but that's okay. My name is Katherine Graham again. I work on content at the MIT Knowledge Futures Group, and primarily,
I looked at these this morning before well, originally, Katherine was not going to have slides, so maybe the universe.
It might make sense at this point just to double check and see if we want to try to pull them up on Google just as a background.
I mean, they are there. I don't know why it's not. You know what? Okay, just give them from here and then present this view. It's fine. Just you'll have to advance it, and it's not as giant, but everybody can see it. So. Yeah, it's something weird. They are there. All right. Okay.
Well,
just go for it.
you see my note says, hello, it's me.
I'm going to stand and cover it.
At least it doesn't say.
Modesty,
Well, you see my prep. So, anyway, my name is Katherine Ahern. I work on content for the MIT Knowledge Futures Group, and I work primarily on a platform called PubPub. It's an open source, open access publishing platform. I'm not actually going to be talking too much about the platform itself or demoing, but I'm happy to talk about that after the panel if you're interested. But I will say that as part of the Knowledge Futures Group, our team is very dedicated to building flexible, sustainable alternatives to commercial publishing technologies out of a belief that the tools and infrastructures that communities and institutions use to create and share their research and knowledge should also be owned by them and be informed, and their development should be informed by them. And we see PubPub as just one platform in helping bring that world about. We think that there should be many of them, and many diverse options to match the diversity of scholarship and the people working on different projects. So right now we have over 650 communities on the platform, and that's because anyone can create a community at any time for free from our homepage. And this has obviously been really helpful for the growth of PubPub itself, but I think more relevant to the conversation today, it's been extremely helpful in informing our team about what people are really needing. And by people I mean authors and publishers, but also readers. So when we talk about PubPub communities, we talk very broadly about communities because we have such a variance of different types of publishing outputs on the platform. So you'll have university presses publishing open monographs, we'll have journals, conference proceedings, drafts up for community review, lab notes and things like that. So we call them communities, and we also engage with this multiplicity of users in order to learn more about what it is that they're needing. And I think the key in this dynamic is that while authors and communities will come to us and say, we really need this thing to support this type of research that we want to publish, and it'll help build PubPub, just as often something that we build will then prompt a community or an author to rethink the way that they can or should publish their own work. So it's this really nice positive loop back and forth that we find really kind of helpful and exciting to us. So I am trying to be brief because I'd like to spend more time talking as a group about these things, but I think this sentence here, publishing is a process, not a product, really does help summarize a lot of the conversations and questions we get in these conversations we're having with our communities on PubPub. This slide could have easily said, open is great, but it's not enough. We're really seeing that a lot of communities are putting pressure, not just on the outputs of their work and what those final products look like, but the process in getting there as well. And when you're thinking about community engagement, how are we defining engagement? Where would we like to have that engagement? We've seen a lot of people open up the process to invite people into it, before the final product is published. We've seen, more transparency around peer review, more transparency around giving credit to the many, many different types of people, not just authors that are involved in actually making a thing, and how that enriches the publishing process so that it becomes more of a learning process and a collaboration, and really puts the community it's for first. So that's been nice. And then also thinking about engagement to what end? Like, what are the real goals there? What are we trying to support? And then rethinking what those products are. So we have some journals on the site that are really thinking about whether or not an issue is a helpful unit for them anymore. Recently, in the past, I would say 2.5, 3 months, I've had 3 or 4 conversations with completely separate groups about publishing a living or live book. They're all thinking about that in different ways. They're all defining it. The workflows they might need for that are different. But they're all rethinking this idea that once they publish a monograph, it has to be this final solidified piece of work. One group that I was talking to, they were saying, well, we're actually going to publish an outline and offer some chapters and invite our community to submit, these chapters and additions and media and kind of make this collaborative book. And there would be some kind of review process before they accepted things and made them live. And then we all kind of looked at each other and said, well, at what point did this become a journal, not a living book? And it was funny because you see how easily these terms that we're used to kind of using and relying on can easily blend together when you're rethinking what digital community engagement can be and what it's for. When a lot of these questions are often philosophical, but when you're actually charged with building the products and technologies that are supporting this work, they also become pretty literal. So one example I use is when you're when we're used to talking about something that's published as both openly available and final, and that no longer is necessarily the case, what should the button on PubPub say when you press it? Like, that's a very practical question, and you know, when you're trying to engage with such a diversity of different types of publishing groups and accommodate them, you know, using words like community to talk about each of our, you know, each of our communities, our publishing groups, is one thing, but then when you're actually building tools that feel accessible and that people can, you know, reflect themselves onto, it's a little bit more difficult. And so that's an ongoing conversation we've been having. We're looking at what other people are doing. We're not in any way doing it the best in each case. And it's also part of why we find the library community so helpful, and that, you know, a lot of the times librarians are on the ground kind of talking with researchers at their institutions often, and they also help inform everything that we're thinking about. So I'll leave it there. I'll hand it off to Katherine. Thank you.
Hi everybody. I'm Katherine. I work at the MIT Libraries, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we in particular have directed projects or been involved in things using PubPub, and in particular because PubPub is was born in our MIT community, and we always want to support it. And I send people to Katherine all the time, whether she's likes it or not, whether she can handle it or not. So very quickly, the content that we in the libraries create or that we steward, for example, the PDFs of journal articles and conference proceedings that we gather under MIT's open access policies, that stuff lives typically in our institutional repository D space, or in Dome, which is a place for images and other special collections, digitized materials, or it's on our own WordPress web pages or news stories and so on. But increasingly we're finding that we are being approached by ourselves. We have projects that don't readily fit in these places, or we're being approached by people who want to publish, do we have to put it in quotes now? Publish things that are that could really benefit from something like PubPub, or that really just wouldn't work at all in places in the sites and repositories that we have. So I have three quick examples. They are, so a couple of institute-wide task forces, and over the last few years there was a Future of Libraries task force. These were not just libraries, they were institute-wide, but the libraries had a big role in them and worked on the reports that came out. So the Future of Libraries task force and more recently the Open Access task force, they both had sort of a similar process where they created draft reports, partway through the task force's work. They wanted community feedback on those reports, and not just internally, but the world feedback, and then the authors went back and incorporated that. And in both cases, what they did was, it was pretty simple. They put a PDF up on our library's website, as well as like an email address or a form or something, and people could give feedback that way. And then we also created PubPub pages, PubPub sites, with the HTML version of the reports. And this is just a sample, a screenshot of how you can engage with the text directly in the text, which is so wonderful. You can highlight it. Somebody asks a question, and then someone else can respond to it, and there are all kinds of conversations like that going on throughout the reports that were extremely helpful for the writers of them. Another example, which is super awesome, I think, and exciting, it's at millie.pubpub.org. So Millie Dresselhaus was a world-famous physicist, engineer. She's the queen of the queen of carbon science. There's a great commercial with her in it. You should check it out. So she died. She's an institute professor at MIT, and she died in 2017. And I'm in the scholarly communications department at MIT in the libraries, and we got an email from her assistant soon after she died, saying he said that they were organizing this symposium in her honor, and he had some questions about figuring out a way to secure author rights for the oral presentations, the videos, the posters, the slides that would be in that symposium, because he wanted to post them somewhere, publish them somewhere, and he wasn't sure yet where. And then he also asked us, do you have any suggestions for where to publish this? We do not have our own in-house. We don't publish in the libraries at MIT, but of course there's the MIT Press, so we sent him over to the press and also to PubHub, and they talked amongst themselves and decided to publish the works on PubHub. We did indeed create this author rights template for him that he used with all authors, so he had the rights to go and put the materials openly available on PubHub. Everything's under CC BY license there. And the website is just great. One of the great things about PubHub is that it looks good, and you can have images and video and audio and all kinds of stuff. And if we could create a collection like this in our DSpace, it would just look terrible, and there's no way to embed a video, for example. So this is just a nice way to gather everything together and create kind of a new kind of proceedings, which incorporates both personal reflections and science, and it's something that doesn't readily fit into your typical journal. And then finally, the MIT libraries, we work very closely with the MIT Press. We help support open access initiatives there, and one of the first ones that we did is we had this experimental fund to help make a series of books called the Strong Ideas series, open access. It's a hybrid print and open access series. There are so far 4. The 4th one is coming out in the spring, and and all of the open access versions are up on PubHub. One of the cool things about putting it up on PubHub is that the last in the series, or the 4th in the series, is called Data Feminism, and the authors, about 18 months before, so it comes out in the spring, 18 months before, then put up a draft of their book in these chapter chunks, and asked scholars in their community and the community at large to peer review it, to do an open peer review on PubHub. Alongside that, of course, was a traditional peer review happening, and then they had this finite period where it was open, then they closed it. They're going to take all that feedback and incorporate it into the final version. So that's just another great use of PubHub. Thank you.
We should have tried harder to get yet another Catherine. Would you be willing to leave your name?
Sorry, I will take this a completely different direction now with the Liz version of this. Let's see. One perspective that I'm going to bring to this, to give you continuity, I will also talk about PubHub. I will also set in the context of the work that that Katherine mentioned at the beginning, which is that we worked on a report that looked at expansive digital publishing. And in that respect, which is published on PubHub, if you want to look at it, it really looks kind of more broadly, not just at the ways that people want to actually publish openly to a community, but also the various ways that people are trying to publish in that way are confounding our expectations, our pathways, platforms, sustainability plans, so that there are lots of things that are more difficult about those types of publications. And I also have some notes here. I'm going to try to hit on some other things that Katherine said, and then we'll talk about those later. So thinking about some of the things they've talked about, that this is very much a process. We're seeing that a lot of these types of publications have multiplicity in a lot of different ways. There are lots of different media that they're working with. There are a lot of different audiences that they're trying to reach, not just a scholarly audience. Maybe it's a very vast audience, it's maybe a disciplinary audience, maybe it's a general public. Additionally, there's an expectation of growth, and that kind of growth might be over time. We want to see this added, maybe we're going to see different iterations of the work. We want to put that out there. But there's also an expectation that maybe it started out as something that we thought was a journal, but maybe it's really a book, or maybe it started out as a book, but really it's becoming more journal-like, or maybe it's something completely different. And then this last kind of aspect of expansiveness, it just is not conforming, either because we are not understanding things if they're not book or journal, or that it just really, there's not a good pathway for it. It's clearly a map-based essay, but there's not a good pathway for how to build that and or how to make it scholarly legible, how to reach these different audiences. So in that environment, there are a lot of things that came out of the report. I won't go over the report today, but I want to highlight a few things. I'll highlight things that are in the report that I think, looking at a platform like PubPub and other platforms like it, it's important to think about, like, why would you make those choices? What is it about the support for this type of publishing that we want to keep in mind, and those kinds of values. And then also I want to highlight some things that were important for us and the process that we were going through. So coming back to that sense, it is a process. Where we were in the process, that is why PubPub makes sense for us. So within the report itself, key point, making labor visible. This was a huge, in fact, both of my points from the report are coming from the section on allocating resources. Knowing what it takes to build these types of open scholarship that are very expansive also requires us to know who's involved. And so we are looking in the work we do and in the platforms we're picking out and then the pathways we're following, is the labor visible through this process? Additionally, we are looking at a need to invest in our community and to recognize if it's emerging from our colleagues, if it's coming from the community that we're trying to serve. Really thinking about, are we investing in that community? Are we partnering in a meaningful way? It doesn't mean that we don't work with vendors, but it does ask, is there an alignment that makes sense? Or is it purely transactional? And that should be really key to us in thinking about how to support these kind of publications. For us, ourselves, our own process, PubPub made it amazingly easy to track all of our contributors and in very specific ways. In fact, we would have put a much longer list, except funny thing, the citations would look really wild and wonky if we put all of the people who attended our workshop, which we started to do, and then we're like, maybe they won't work so well. But it does give us a new way of capturing that, which, by the way, like if we put that on WordPress, wouldn't have been built in, wouldn't have been easily supported. That could have been a choice, but in our case, this is what we need to be able to do. Gathering feedback for us, very important to have that. So again, repeating, like this was a feature that was an aspect of PubPub that we really wanted to work with. There are tools, you can do commenting in other ways. In this case, really our community was very specific. You had to log in to comment. We really pushed certain people to come into our community to comment. There are ways we could have managed that. That was a consideration for us. There are other ways to do that, but that was one of the things for us that was really important for our process. Because we were talking about expansive digital publications, there's a lot in the report that doesn't apply. However, there's a whole bunch that does. If you're trying to publish for an open community, it's complicated. There are a lot of questions that you need to be planning for, and we will segue into those questions. And certainly we have more that we think needs to be added here, but I think that's the meat of where we want to spend most of our discussion today. So I'll start with a few of them, and these are, and there's a third one that we were just talking about. There's so many, there are more, but the two I think I would start with is really asking that question about that community. I don't know that we ask that question enough. We say everybody, you know, the public or our peers, but it really, we really need to ask the question if we really know who they are. Are we reaching out to them in an intentional way? Again, reiterating a lot of points that came up earlier. I think I like the phrase, open is great, but it's not enough. It's like it's there, but how are they going to find it and how are they going to interact with it? And also, I mean, there's always the question of the content. What does the content need? I would also add to that, what does the author need? So one of the things we didn't talk about in our slides, but in great depth, but like it's not just us. We're working with researchers who also want to be able to reach out to communities. Will these tools be useful to them? Will they be able to use them in a meaningful way? Again, could use WordPress to track contributors, would have required a lot more work. So is that something we want to ask our communities to do? And with that, I'm going to just sit down and maybe bring the mic over. Thank you.
I know I have a lot of questions, but I'd like to throw it open to you guys for your questions. Start here.
So I have a question that's not directly tied to what's up on the screen, but something all of you mentioned, which is the conversations that you've been having with the scholars wanting to publish are still talking about journal and book. Are you having conversations where we are breaking free of those traditional containers? I'm sure we're all thinking about that, but are the researchers and scholars you're talking to starting to think about moving away from either journal or book?
Do you mind if I start? And I don't know if
Can you guys hear okay? I think we should move the mic because of the recording in the back, just so
okay.
we wouldn't want it not to be
Okay.
audible later. Thank you.
So, it's funny because they don't talk about book or journal, they talk about website, which may not be surprising. And when they say website, they mean the panoply of ways that content can be displayed digitally and interacted with. So honestly, I think, in my mind, from trying to figure out a pathway that makes sense and try to think about sustainable, I find I'm often trying to think about those things. I think I don't think that they're thinking about journal or book. And also, so I think it's incumbent upon us to know what's available. And I would say one of the things that also came out of the workshop was, we want to know what those pathways are. Because the challenge is that, so there's another project I didn't talk about, which is it's a website, it's an open educational resource. And often, the faculty and student team wants to add other things to it. And the question becomes, will that tool be supported in a few years? Do you really want it to be scholarly legible and to be citable and to be running? Like those things, depending on how you answer that, those may not be available. So I think if we can separate ourselves from the expectation of it'll always be there and embrace what is it in the present moment, it's not such a problem.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question. So the answer is they are thinking quite broadly. Yeah.
I would just add to that, well, so data is clearly something that they're thinking really a lot about. But we have I get a lot of questions about journals and books. I mean, the journals are still the main thing for us and for them. But we have one of our collection strategists she's working on a pilot project because of course we need to start thinking more broadly about what is scholarly output. And she's working on, with our subject matter liaisons on like targeting researchers, going basically door to door to researchers and asking them about all the other stuff that they create and figuring out ways to gather the blog posts and the web and the audio and the tech reports and the podcasts, whatever all the other stuff. And what do we do with that stuff when we get it? Sometimes we do get deposits to DSpace that are videos. And just last week we got a couple videos that accompanied a paper. And they can go up there, sure, they went up there. There's no way to, you just have to download it it's not ideal. But it's, we get that stuff. And we're trying to start thinking about how to more actively gather it, but there's so much. So, it's a huge goal.
I'll also just briefly say that I think oftentimes, even when authors don't mean book or journal, those are just the words that we have. Like, we don't really have the vocabulary to effectively talk about all these different potential outputs. And so those tend to be the words that we hear, and a lot of times I'm interpreting what it is they actually want to do and get out of this book that they've come to me about. And we can continue calling it a book. It could end up having a completely different look or feel or purpose, but we'll still have this conversation under the umbrella of talking about this book. And I also find that a lot of it, most of our conversations come back to tenure and promotion practices and questions, but oftentimes people are most concerned about publishing things that they feel will help their career and advancement, and you can't blame them for that. And if monograph is the thing that's going to look the best, they're still going to say, I want a monograph, even if what you actually end up producing is much more interesting, in my opinion, more experimental. And so, in my opinion, when we can expand the vocabulary and what's considered to be, legitimate for tenure and promotion, I think you'll start hearing more of that language used in conversations.
I can just add one thing onto that, and Catherine's going to go from this. I started as an acquisitions editor for books, and then worked with a lot of acquisitions editors who did journals. And editors get really good at saying no when authors come to them with things that don't fit the traditional model. And we say no because we know that the platform doesn't support it. We say no because we know the publications committee is going to go, are you out of your mind? Like, how would we do that? And so it's important, as we've been talking about, to know what is possible and where all those possibilities lie, so that we don't automatically say no, and we can actually hear. Not everything might be possible, but at least you're like, let's get past the no and talk about the maybe. Eileen.
This, to me, is the crux of everything in some ways. And I think it's really important, as Rupert Gaddy pointed out yesterday, that we have to emphasize bibliodiversity, and that we have to stop having discussions about, is the book going to look like this or like this? I want all the books. I want the traditional print-forward, design-forward books. I want the experimental books. I want the remix books. We can do that. And we also have to understand that the form of the book is a cognitive structure as well as a material substrate that, in the humanities at least, which is my field, absolutely is conducive to a certain kind of thought. So people are always going to write books. The book isn't going anywhere. But let's stop, saying we want to emphasize this sort of book over that book. And as regards tenure and all that kind of stuff, I mean, the reason I founded Pumpkin Books was literally because of my frustration as an academic with acquisitions editors and other editors who were handling my work and driving me insane because they weren't listening to what I wanted to accomplish. And I wanted to found a press that said to authors, come to us with your weirdest ideas, and we'll publish them, and we'll help you overcome the tenure issue. Because there's ways in which you can create a platform, whether it's Manifold or PubPub or Punctum or OLH, where you can work in a certain way to bring to that platform the so-called authority, prestige, words I hate. But you can do that. You can play that game if you need to. And one of the cool things about scholar-led presses, in my opinion, is they're being led by scholars who can see things from both sides. What it's like to be an author, what it means to be an editor and a publisher, and eventually things start to shift. As an academic, I volunteered to chair a committee that went for 2 years to revise our tenure and promotion guidelines. This happened over 10 years ago, to include review structures for digital projects that were experimental and incremental, right? How do you review that versus a regular monograph? And we succeeded, and the dean approved it. So, this is happening, let's remember that. And whenever scholars especially complain with, but tenure, I just look at them and say, and who do you think makes the decision about how books get reviewed for tenure? It's you. So work harder at your institution to change the guidelines for tenure, and then on the other side, on the publishing side, we'll work, to meet you halfway. And last year was the first year we started getting first books for tenure. We're publishing 5 books this year, and I've already published 2 of them, that are first books for tenure at Research One institutions in Europe and the US. So we can overcome this, but it's a collective effort. Woo! And librarians play no little part in this. Librarians are also part of this puzzle.
I mean, my response to that is just like, yes. We have this conversation a lot at the Knowledge Futures Group where, we'll debate, or we used to debate if we should try fighting for change from the top down and bottom up. We've kind of decided to attack from both sides.
It's a good strategy.
We also talk a lot about how change has to be both technological and cultural, and that we can develop the tools that can support the things, but we also have to educate and have the conversations and be in the rooms and try to really just change people's minds and the ways that things are decided and the thought process.
And bottom up is really important too. Both strategies are good, but bottom up works.
I'm really excited that you're in the room, so because I want to ask you some questions. One of the things
Well,
that
and thank you to Duke, because Duke University was one of the first universities to put their money where their mouth is for supporting open access platforms, including Pumpkin, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the ScholarWorks is the group that was behind that as well. I mean, we're really interested in how do we push this forward. And so one of the things that we do when people bring to us an idea, and we're not a publisher. We are a group that is trying to facilitate better publishing in this new environment. And partly we want people's work to be legible. And this is tricky because they need to bring along their peers who are expecting the work to look a particular way or have these particular signs. And so things like contributors and being clear about who participated for us is both ethically appropriate and it's helpful if down the road you're trying to say, I participate in this. I'm curious how those conversations happen when someone's producing a scholarship that has, I don't want to get us too far off topic of our panel.
We only have about 2 minutes, so I'm going to say, I'm not sure where people are going after this, but I'm sure that the panelists are happy to stick around a lot, but let's keep going for the 2 minutes.
I'm really curious about what are the things that we are agreed upon are the markers of scholarly legibility, the things that we want the work to be able to do. Is it being able to see who contributed what? Is it that it's citable? Is it, is it getting very clear kinds of impact around it? Or is it educating our peers how to read these new works? Maybe it's all of the above, but I'd be curious kind of how you're approaching that.
I think it is all of the above in some ways. I mean, it's all of the above, and it's also, I was trained as a medievalist, and one of my specialties was warfare and war strategy. Don't ask me why. But,
I'm a military historian.
Okay, so I really, Pumpkin is devoted to making everything we do open source. We just moved all our digital operations to Albania, where my co-director has lived for like 10 plus years, and also in the Netherlands. And we're all, everything, but there's big pieces of the puzzle that are feel immovable, like Amazon, right? But it's like in military warfare, and this also covers wars of attrition, right? But that's a different subject. It's the swarm. You can't beat Amazon like Alibaba can beat Amazon at their own game, and they are kind of doing that. That's the Chinese equivalent of Amazon. But the swarm, you have a castle, and the best way to get in there is in a swarm, not a bomb, not blowing it up, because you need the castle, which could be the university or the big 5 publishers or whatever. But you swarm things. We just need a multiplicity. My biggest worry right now is this single platform capitalism, and that we not fall into that trap, and that we never think we need something that always has to scale up and always has to be legible to every single community. We need to promote a profusion of experimentation. That's why I came to this session, because I want to hear what you guys have to say about that. And we need as many different things happening at once until eventually there's just a kind of overload, and it becomes what the landscape is about. But we have to figure out how to support all the different experiments. That's the tricky part, because so many great things get started, and we all know this, then they disappear. They end up in a graveyard, they lose steam, the people involved don't have what they need to keep it going. This is what we need to be careful of now.
So I think we're at time, but did you have a quick question? That you had it before. No? Okay. All right. Do you have a question?
Yeah, look, I think it's a long question, so I'll pose it, and if you guys are like, okay, enough. So I was really interested. 650 communities, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you actually manage the members of those communities?
We don't. So they're all independently organized and managed. We say that we're content and genre agnostic. We will get involved in helping with production and design if they need it.
But just to be clear, so if I make a comment on community A,
Yeah.
And then I move over to community B, there's no linkage. I've got to, basically.
There'll be, your user profile will show that you've made these comments across the platform, but that's it.
So you've got centralized user profiles?
Yes.
And basically, the method for managing that is you have a CRM, like a Salesforce kind of tool for outreach and such like, or is it all very baked into the PubPub platform?
For outreach to new,
Yeah, so let's suppose hypothetically you've got, 1,500 members or whatever, and somebody's got a new community, and you've got like 5 totally related communities. Kind of be cool to be able to advertise the fact that there are 5 related communities.
We're working on it right now.
That's one of the reasons that I came on board. It's only been 6 months, so Stephen, you're gonna give me a little bit of time. But
We're
it's a really
working
important
on-
question.
So I actually had this conversation with one of our interns last week because so far everything has been pretty organic. People can just create communities. So we would turn around and suddenly see that there was this really cool thing happening over here, which we love. Like we don't want to get in the way of any of that. But now someone asked us at Forest 11 a few weeks ago, how many of the communities on PubPub are books? How many are journals? Like what's your breakdown? And I was like, I don't know. I forgot what I said. I like made something up. But we don't actually know. And part of the problem is that a community can be lots of things. It can say it's going to be a book and then decide to be a journal, or
Multiple books,
it
multiple
cannot
journals.
know what it is yet until it gets to a certain point with its community and drafting and stuff. So there's also, we as the developers don't have permissions to see private, documents. So there can be a lot going on in a community, even though it looks blank. And we don't know. So we're kind of doing a superficial tag of things right now. And then I think we're going to try to incorporate or give community admins the option to self-identify their community however they'd like when they create one, but that won't be required.
Yeah, you can manage the permissions like Google Docs. So it can be open and visible to everyone. It can be just to like the 5 people who are working on the project together. There can be individual versions for students in different classes. So it's very, very flexible, but it means that we don't always have the complete site. So
I just wanted to say this, sounds like it connects to the session you said before this one, which is
On
also
privacy.
like on privacy. How much of this do we really want to build in to make these connections? Do people want to buy into that by joining a community?
well, we'll see.
Yeah.
So we're past time. Thank you for coming. Another round of applause for our speakers.